Seymour Tubbs was working for his family's textile business in Gloucestershire when war was declared in August 1914. Seymour joined up in Gloucester as soon as he could and was commissioned as an officer. There is a history of the 2nd 5th Battalion of the Gloucestershire Regiment, published in 1930, written by A.F. Barnes MC, who was a musician, a Fellow of the Royal College of Organists. In his military service he became Captain of C Company and Acting Adjutant, and to that extent his military career was similar to Seymour's, who was also at one time Adjutant and was Captain of D Company at the time of his death on the 22nd of August 1917. The 2nd 5th Battalion was formed in the very early part of September 1914 to act as a second line to the 1st 5th. They did not fulfil that role for long, but were destined to join the BEF, the British Expeditionary Force. This was not a PALS battalion. Those came along later as a morale boost to the recruiting of the so-called Kitchener armies, raised to replace and reinforce the losses of 1914 and early 1915. Initially there were no uniforms for the men, but it was not long before it was possible to make a film showing the uniformed men on the march. I don't know if any of that film survives. Before long they were training at Northampton and from April 1915 at Chelmsford, along with the whole division. Barnes explains that musketry practice took place at Boreham, near Chelmsford, and it did, he said. Ho, ho, ho. After several different brigade names, they became part of the 184th Brigade of the 61st 2nd South Midlands Division, alongside the 2nd 4th Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, known as the Ox and Bucks, and the 2nd 1st Buckinghamshire Battalion, and the 2nd 4th Royal Berkshire Regiment. The 2nd South Midlands was initially a territorial backup to the 1st, but the division was made independently available for overseas service. There is one amusing anecdote about Seymour. Though an infantry battalion, there was a modest supply of horses, officers for the use of. Seymour was not a skilled rider, but as a young lieutenant he was called to act as a temporary adjutant, i.e. assistant to the commanding officer. For this he was required to be mounted, but the horse bolted. It was reported that he had finished up, reposing unhurt in a hedge some distance up the road. There is a 1914 photograph of the officers at Gloucester, with Seymour standing third from right, first equal in height of those in the rear row. Officers were required to purchase their own uniforms, so their provision was separate from that of the men. They received an allowance to enable this. Training was a lengthy process. Only in February 1916 did the division move to Salisbury Plain for its final training before embarkation, which began on the 24th of May 1916 and saw them in France the following day. By the 29th they were in the line and being tutored in the realities of trench life by the London Welsh at Ries-Bayer, a few miles southwest of Armentières, that's Armentières, near Armentières itself, and at other locations thereabouts. Though this was a quiet area and well away from the Somme, casualties soon began to mount. On the 19th of July the division was engaged in a failed attack on Aubert Ridge, which was part of a strategy to prevent the Germans from reinforcing their position on the Somme. The Somme campaign itself was planned to divert attention from the plight of the French at Verdun. Apart from a raid that took place on the 18th of August, the line was then relatively quiet. On October the 27th, they moved south towards the Somme and went into the line at Grandcourt, close to the scene of the very first tank action a few weeks earlier. At the end of 1916, after being recommended for the MC, he was invalided home with trench fever and rheumatism, but returned to the front in May 1917. In the event, no MC was awarded. Seymour's long period of training before embarkation, followed by absence from the front due to illness or injury, probably prolonged his life beyond its otherwise very short expectation. Operations on the Somme were very largely closed down for winter at the end of November 1916. Meanwhile, the battalion was in and out of the trenches in the Somme area over that winter, spending a whole month out of training in Gapenne. Around the time that Seymour rejoined, the battalion was marched to the Arras sector, 80 miles or so to the north, but not in time for the main offensive there. There followed further periods of training and morale-boosting competitions between platoons and companies. Around the beginning of July, D Company was reinstated and Seymour was made its commanding officer. Of the 4 company commanders at this time, only one survived the war. Seymour's brother Cecil states that there was a brief, happy last meeting in France of the 2 brothers, though the date and whereabouts is not known, but probably near Dieppe, which is where Cecil, having been severely wounded, was in charge of an ammunition dump. From here, the battalion moved towards Ypres, the ruined town in the eponymous salient which faced the Passchendaele Ridge. The ridge was heavily fortified by the enemy, with enormously strong concrete machine gun posts, built, it was rumoured, with British cement bought through neutral intermediaries. The mud in the British trenches was legendary. Barnes tells of an Australian who had sunk up to his chin while mounted on a horse. On the 22nd of August, 2 companies of the Gloucesters were backing up an attack by the Ox and Bucks to be made on one of the concrete machine gun posts at Pond Farm, of which there were over 30. The next part of the tale is quoted in full. Both battalions made a magnificent advance which carried them right forward almost to their limits. But, as so often happened, the losses were so great that it was impossible to hold the furthest objectives, and they were pushed back fighting hard. Soon D Company was dispatched to reinforce the left and B Company the right. While moving up with D Company, gallant Seymour Tubbs was killed leading his men. The expression "he was loved by everyone" became rather the convention of the day, but in the case of Captain Tubbs it was literally true, because he possessed in an unusual degree the gift of friendship. Wherever he was, there radiated a warmth of happy comradeship. A capable and gallant officer, a perfect sportsman, a delightful companion, he could ill be spared. A brief look at a sketch map of the sector shows the Allied or Anglicised names for the features in the area: Keir Farm, Gallipoli Copse and so on, including Pond Farm, which is unusual in keeping its pre-war name in translation. The pond still exists. Stein-Boutet belongs to the family which presently owns Pond Farm. Stein is an historian of the war and collects any objects unearthed during farming activity and displays them in his private museum. He is also building a working replica of a Mark IV tank. Seymour's name has now been added to a memorial column inside the museum. Seymour was killed by a shell explosion and there were few remains to bury. His death is recorded on the memorial at Tyne-Cot, panel 72, column 1. It is also recorded on the Town War Memorial in Wootton-under-Edge that was designed by his father, and also on the memorial at Harrow School. A memorial service was held at Charfield Parish Church on the 10th of September. What passing bells for those who die as cattle! Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells and bugles calling for them from sad shires.